Welcome to Witch Talks, a series for spiritual seekers, witches, and enlightened souls. I'm Hannah the Suburban Witch, an intuitive tarot reader, astrologer, and eclectic witch, and I hope you're ready to get up close and personal with your favourite witches. In this episode, I'm chatting with Storm Faerywolf. He is an author, international magic teacher, warlock, and priest. He's one of the founding teachers of the Black Rose School of Witchcraft, which you can refer to episode 15 and 16 for more on that when we chatted with Devon. He's also the founder of the Blue Rose lineage of the fairy tradition of witchcraft. I am so looking forward to sharing his work and his wisdom with you today. He's joining us via Zoom all the way from California. Hey, Storm, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Very, very glad to have you here. And I wanted to start off by taking a squidry-dig at your birth chart. So having a little look there and sharing with everyone a bit about what makes you tick. So your moon sign, and I know you know a little bit about this as well, but your moon sign is in Gemini, which is the sign of the twins. Now, Geminis are known for being sociable, lighthearted, chatty, fun to be around, but sometimes there can be another side as well to you. And the trick here is to make sure that your mind is basically constantly stimulated and you're feeling heard by the people that are around you so you don't turn to the dark side. Gemini moons have a deep need for talking through their emotions. And when this need isn't met, it can bring out a more vindictive side to your character. And that often I find with our moon signs as well becomes very apparent in our teenage years, especially when emotions, are up and down and hormones make them go wild. So having a journal, engaging in singing, music, writing helps you work through your strong emotions. And they're all really great habits to get into or turn to if you don't have someone to chat with. But knowing you've got a house full of other witches to talk to, hopefully have one on hand when you need it. How does that all sort of sound to you?
So far, so good.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely have to talk or write my way through my emotions, to figure out, how do I actually feel about this? I have to parse it out. So yeah, definitely. And I'm definitely a talker, so my mom would say that I started talking at 6 months and then never shut up. So so it's probably appropriate that I found myself in the career that I do, writing and talking. So
No, it's fantastic. Words I find are a very big deal for those with this placement. So if you can find a way to express that healthily, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I love words. And when I was a kid, I always thought, I'll be an artist because I loved drawing and all that. But there was something about when I got into writing, and not necessarily writing stories. That was never really my strong point. But just being able to describe how I feel or my perspectives on things. And that really kind of, when I was in school, that really clicked with me. And I thought, maybe I'm going to be a writer. And here I am today. That's like the main thing that I do. I write and I talk. So far, so good.
And your latest book, which I'm currently reading, is about magical names, which, as I said, words are important, names are important. And I do find Geminis particularly have a very good knack for naming things. So that's like a little hidden talent that they often seem to have. So I think that just sums up perfectly, I guess, the vibe of Gemini in your book, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
Now,
Thanks.
for those who haven't read this book, though, which is called The Witch's Name, and it is Crafting Identities of Magical Power. Can you tell everyone what it is about, what's included in this book?
Yeah, well, first I want to say what it's not. It's not just a dictionary of names. That's kind of stuff is out there already, and that's important. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to really talk about the magical name, the pagan name, the witch's name, as a type of spell, that it is really about crafting our magical persona, and so the name that we choose, we have an opportunity to bring in elements, perhaps of things that we, to which we want to aspire, or to reinforce certain strengths, perhaps, that we feel we do possess. And so we're going to draw that in, to our chosen name, because it helps us to step into a sense of ourself, but not just the self that we have haphazardly, cultivated through, interactions with the world and what people think of us, and maybe what our parents, decided for us, at the time that they gave us our name. But we have an opportunity to use our craft to literally create ourselves. We are self-creating. And I think that's so terribly important, in terms of magic and the craft. If we can step into our own power and feel that power, then everything that we touch is going to be informed, by that power. So I wanted to create a book that wasn't just, here are some names that you can choose from, or even just here's some ideas for how you might go about, choosing a name. But I wanted it to be a journey. I wanted it to have hands-on stuff. There's journal prompts, there's exercises, there's rituals for considering different aspects, pulling in historical names, pulling in perhaps from mythology or from the natural world. And I also wanted to do this book because I know that there's been a lot of, I would say, weirdness around my own public craft name. And, I would get teased. I get kind of bullied on the internet, for it. I would see people say, I can't take him seriously, with a name like that. And that's all okay. What I'm saying is, here's an opportunity to confront all of that. If you think that my name is silly, that's fine. You don't have to have a name like Storm Faerywolf. It could be something totally different. But let's look at what your reactions are. Why do you have resistance to a quote unquote silly sounding name, like mine? What does that bring up for you? And I feel that just in terms of the craft in general, I often say that it's probably time for us to make friends with silly. Because if we don't care about how we look to other people, that is such a freeing state of mind to be in. It's like that saying, dance like nobody's watching, so I kind of think of that. So that was all elements that kind of went into me choosing the name. And then I just felt it was time. I think the last straw was somebody on the internet said something snarky about my name. And I was like, haha, I'm going to turn that into a book, so I kind of do try when people throw weird, like negative energy at me, I'm like, how can I shape this into something positive? Put it out there in terms of our project. Because what else are you going to do? Just going to sit there and bitch on the internet about it? Or are you going to try to do something good? So
that actually leans right into something that I wanted to touch on today. So I'm just going to talk about it right now, which is
nice.
Now, I haven't finished the book yet, as I was saying before we started, but because I'm taking my time with it, because I'm really, really enjoying it. And
thank you.
For most books that I have to read for like book reviews and the ones that publishers send me, like I read them, I love them, I review them, I take notes as I'm writing them. But this one, I've noticed I'm not even taking notes because I'm just sort of getting lost in your writing. It's very gripping. Like I just want to know more and keep reading. So that's fantastic.
Thank you. I think that's high praise. Thank you very much.
And I read a lot of books. So yeah, for when they grab me, like they just take my attention away from everything else. I definitely get lost in books, which is great. But there is one exercise that I wanted to share with everyone. And it is exactly what you were talking about there. It's called elemental balancing. And what you've done is you've listed lots of exercises. They're all great. And I cannot wait to get into them. So for this, you have said to, begin preparing your space, ground and center. And in a previous exercise, you had mentioned to write down some things that maybe you like about yourself or don't like about yourself. It's not quite as black and white as that, but qualities like fear or worry or things like that you might have. And so you've said to, bring up this list of items that we've already worked through in a meditative space. And then something like fearful, you might wish to say a few words. So fearful, I'm afraid of being alone, of losing connection, a deeply sick queasiness in my stomach, and uncomfortable tingling in my arms. That's your example, right? And this one, you recite it and imagine your voice is projecting all of that into a glass of water, right? So you're putting that, maybe it's fear, anger, maybe it's distracted, whatever else is going on for you or in your body, you're pouring all of that purposefully into this glass of water. And then you have an incantation. By the air, my mind now clear. By the fire, my will now bright. By the water, my depths now seen. By the earth, my form now strong. And you've lit a red candle, adding some salt and a clean quartz crystal to the water. And then, and by the ether, my soul now soars. And here my poison is transformed. And so the whole idea is to transform these into, something better. You've said, imagine all the negative energies you've placed in the water are being transformed by the elemental principles. in your mind's eye, you see the air blowing clear through the water. So this is just a very brief overview of this exercise. But I just sat there and went, what a powerful, powerful, powerful exercise. And you could use that in many different ways as well. But I thought that idea of transforming it, rather than when I first read it, I thought you were going to pour the water outside on the ground or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But instead you're ingesting it and it's transformed. It's that alchemical transformation that is such a powerful thing to have in the craft. So that's the sort of stuff that's in this book, rather than a dictionary of names. It is, getting to the core part of you and what your values are and what you want to project into the world. And it's fantastic. I feel like I'm gushing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that particular style, I guess, of magical working stems heavily from my work in the fairy tradition. There is a particular exercise that I call the waters of purity, and most fairy people would refer to it by a Hawaiian name, kala, in which we would just charge a glass of water with life force, or maybe the idea, of our purification. And then we would drink it, kind of taking that energy in. And the way I was taught was originally you put your negative qualities in there first, and then we work to transform them, with the idea that in fairy, we practice what we might call a good energy ecology, that nothing is ever wasted. And like you mentioned, in a lot of, like public spells, that deal with like cleansing and purification, really are types of banishings, where, I have this bad habit. I've got this anger, and we put this anger into a rock, and I'm going to throw it, throw the rock into the ocean, or, something like that. And that can be powerful, but there's also in this, the recognition that, well, even if it's anger or even if it's fear, it's actually still my own power. It's my life force. And so I don't want to give that up. What I want to do is I want to heal it. So we want to transform it. We do want to use, like you said, that alchemical transformative process, because, witches, we love power, and that doesn't mean we want to like dominate other people necessarily, but like power from within. We want our personal power. We want to be able to live our lives and be effective and potent in our decisions. And we don't do that by giving our power away, even like by banishing my fear. What am I really doing? It's kind of, to me, it's kind of like, I have an infection in my finger, so I'm going to cut off my finger. Well, no, I need antibiotics. I need to heal the infection. I don't want to get rid of anything, if I can avoid it, so a lot of my work in fairy, obviously, translates, into this book and informs, what I do. So I'm just doubly happy when people pick up on that and they're like, oh, this is really cool. So I have to give credit where credit's due. That comes, I dressed it up in a different way, but that's really straight out of fairy tradition in terms of like the good energy ecology. And I'd like to promote that idea to more witches, that like, hey, let's stop banishing ourselves. If we don't like something about ourselves, we're not going to heal that by hating on it or denying it. Most often we just put that in our shadow, and then it's just there festering. So now we need to shine light on it. We need to heal it. We need to transform it. We need to own it. And only by owning it can we, I don't want to say rise above it, but that gives the right idea, that we're going to champion it.
It's very empowering, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's the point of all the craft. Really, when you get down to it, we're trying to be self-empowered, and then through hopefully being self-empowered, hopefully we can then connect with others who are likewise self-empowered, and we can make powerful communities and work towards global change. And that's a lofty goal, but I kind of think that magic is a pretty lofty enterprise. So
yeah, well, that's definitely the dream. Absolutely. I've definitely used this sort of idea before, right? Where, I might take my unicorn drink bottle and speak words into it that I want to bring into my body, whether that's, words of healing or of love. I do the same with my kitchen witchery. So as I'm, making a soup or a cup of tea, absolutely, I might speak over it into what I want to bring in. And, with my breath, I'm changing the properties there and then drink it down. But I've just never considered the act of, maybe I could speak, if I'm unwell, speak the sickness into my cup of tea and then transform it into something that's going to heal that sickness. It's almost that like attracts like, but shifting it. I don't know. My brain's going all crazy, creative places.
Think about like when they make like like an antidote to a poison. You
They use
start with a little
poison.
bit of the poison, right? So you make medicine from poison, and so that's kind of how I see it. It's like we have this poison inside us, kind of all the time. We're picking up stuff from the world and whatever, and with our own baggage, interacts, and maybe it's in our shadow now, it's festering. So we have this poison. And so wouldn't it be great if we could just take some of that and then magically create the antidote? And I mean, we're witches, we should be able to do this, or at least we should have the mindset that we can. I think that if we go into it thinking, oh, I could never do that, well, then you're right. You never will. But if you go into, even if it's an artificial sense of confidence, that can actually really help. If you just switch into a mindset where, yes, I am confident, I am powerful, I can make this alchemical transformation, then you are much more likely to be able to achieve that. So yeah. I'm just hoping that people will take that and be able to run with it.
Yeah. See if you can visualize it before you do it. I use that advice with my own daughter. She's like, I can't do something. I'm like, I want you to say, I can do it. And you're going to say that 5 times. Then we're going to picture doing it in our heads, in our mind's eye. And then we're going to try again. And then she usually either does it or gets much closer and her confidence starts to skyrocket. So
Right. We're our own worst enemies.
Yes.
I can't. We default to that. Oh, I can't. When really, probably it just means, oh, I'm hard, or it's hard, and I don't know what I'm doing. And it's okay to say those things. It's okay to admit that you don't know what you're doing, but that shouldn't necessarily stop us from trying. We have the ability to learn. So okay, you don't know how to do that, but there was a time that I didn't know how to boil water, and now I can. I didn't know how to use my microwave at one point, and now I can. There's always a point where to learn something can be daunting, but then once we do it, it's kind of like confronting fear, right? I remember being a little boy, and the closet monster, was terrifying me, and my mom would make me get up out of bed and walk across the dark room to touch what invariably was like the raincoat that was hanging like on the thing. But then it didn't bother me anymore, because I was terrifying fear. But it was terrifying. It was at the time. It was like I was like 5 years old. But then that worked. It didn't terrify me anymore because I confronted it, and now I saw it for what it really was. But when I was paralyzed in my bed, going over like, oh, this is this horrible thing, and whatever, it's just that fear paralyzes you, and it's an illusion. And now with fear, I want to also say sometimes fear is good. I definitely am not on the new age train that like, oh, all fear is bad, fear is the opposite of love. BS. Fear often keeps us safe. It tells us about boundaries. It tells us that something's important. When our heart starts pumping, we know, hey, we better pay attention. But that's also good. Those endorphins, the adrenaline can make us sharper, in the moment. It's when fear paralyzes us that it becomes a problem. And it's not so much the fear, it's the relationship that we have to it. So something like this, we can kind of we can take control of our relationship with it.
Yeah. Or when the fear is disproportionate to what's actually happening, which I think sometimes that happens. We just get these fear responses that are, the body is reacting to something that it's not really, as bad as it seems, like those panic things. I've had panic attacks before, and it's that sort of a vibe where my body's reacting like something's happening, but nothing's happening. So yeah, when it's disproportionate, that's when it can get really bad. But when it's there, when it's supposed to be, that's powerful. We need that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we need to be able to discern it, obviously, and so I like that witch is saying, I think it may come out of the reclaiming tradition, where there's fear, there's power. And so I try to remind myself when I'm having those fear responses that really all fear is, it's like the imaginary little man, waving a red flag, saying, pay attention. He's not saying do it. He's not saying don't do it. He's saying, pay attention to the situation. This is important, and we still, the choice is ours. We have to decide, based on all the information that we have, but we should snap out of our paralysis and then like look at it, and recognize, okay, I'm experiencing fear. Now, what am I going to do with that? Because what is fear? It's, what is any emotion? It's energy running through our psyche. So if we can kind of take a step back into that observational space, at least for me, I found that it kind of lessens that grip, that fear can potentially have on you and cause you to be paralyzed.
Definitely. Now, speaking of fear, one thing that I have noticed in social media especially is this fear around if people have your real name, birthday, all of those sorts of details, that it creates what you would term a tag lock in the craft. They can be targeted for potential hexes and baneful magic. So I wanted to talk specifically about that, using names as a tag lock in magical workings. So what is to stop a magical name becoming a tag lock as well?
Well, I mean, anything really that's associated with you can be a tag lock. And, so whether that is obviously like my public magical name, I'm sure, people have done magic, on me using my name, getting a photo off the internet, what have you. And old school, the old school witchery days, it was all about personal concerns, right? It was like, a lock of their hair or some nail clippings or whatever. And all of that stuff is powerful in terms of, tag locks. But if we're speaking to other magic users, and I think that, people who practice the craft, maybe this is too broad of a brush, but I often find there's a little streak of paranoia that runs through magic practitioners, because a lot of us do have a little bit, at least, of that paranoia about like, oh, is somebody going to work the roots on me, or are they doing this, doing that? And so some people, I think, take it to the nth degree, and they're not going to share anything about themselves. And these are the people online that like don't use their own photo. You never see a photo of them. They have, a name that's obviously not what they would use, in their normal day-to-day life. Although Storm Faerywolf is the name that I use in my normal day-to-day life, but that's a whole other story. But I just think that we need to recognize that as witches, as warlocks, as magical practitioners, we need to keep up on our cleansing, cleansing and warding. It's just like, that's what's for dinner. You do that. It's like the chop wood, carry water sort of for witches. It's just like every day I'm doing my cleansing, every day, maybe doing, redoing some wards, or like once a month I'm redoing wards, especially if you're out there in the public. I certainly learned this. I would say the hard way, but I think like learning the hard way is often the best way, because you really learn those lessons. I've had people throw curses at me multiple times. And in the beginning, I was like, oh no, that's not real. I'm just making it up. I'm just being a drama queen or whatever. And then it would get proven, and I've had it verified, on several occasions when this would happen. I'd always go to get a reading from somebody else who doesn't know, the situation. So I'm not going to get their own personal stuff, wrapped up in it. But what it taught me is just to be clean, to be on point, to keep doing my work. I think a lot of magical practitioners, I would say probably, maybe especially those who come from established traditions, that have lineaged initiatory systems. It's easy, I would think, for us to get lazy, because a lot of people do kind of approach it. They're like, oh, I got initiated, and it's kind of like graduating, or I got my degree and now I'm this witch, I'm this warlock. And I've watched people then kind of just become lazy afterwards. Oh, I got my title, and that's what it's about. And now they don't have to work anymore. And that's the opposite of the truth. We even look at the word initiation, and what does that mean? It means to begin, so initiating is the beginning of your witchcraft career. The rest of it was preamble. And so now you have a responsibility to actually keep up on your work. All the stuff that you were trained for led you up to this moment. And so now you got to put it into action and make it part of your life. It isn't just something that we do once a month. It isn't something that we just do once a week. If you're going to be an effective magical practitioner, then your entire life becomes your magical practice. And you're always looking for ways to infuse your mundane life with magic. And that's how I think you get around that. So I don't mind, like you were talking about a little bit about my birth chart. I don't mind putting that stuff out there. If people want to look at my full chart, they can look at my full chart. what are they going to do? Are they going to then try to like curse me based on my astrology? Have fun with it. You know, I know what I'm doing. I got my wards and my spirits and stuff that I don't talk about, you know, out there, you know, protecting me. So I don't know, maybe that's somebody's going to hear this and they're going to take it as a challenge. Okay, but just be careful. That's all I have to say about that.
Not my listeners. My listeners are beautiful.
Right. I'm sure that's true. But yeah, I mean, if you know, but having a little bit of the paranoia, I think, is healthy, but only a little bit. You know, you just want to be aware. People could do some, you know, shady stuff.
I interrupt your listening pleasure to ask you if you're enjoying this podcast. I ask because this series is a labor of love, and if you like what you're hearing, consider signing up as a Patreon supporter to see its continued success. Not only will you receive exclusive access to my private Facebook group, but also monthly live readings and moon ritual worksheets. Head over to patreon.com/suburban witchery to sign up now. And now back to the show. All right, now I swear this is relevant. Also very niche. So apologies to any of my followers or listeners that are like, oh, what do you want about? But I heard on the grapevine that you are a fellow Trekkie. Is this true?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I am such a Trekkie.
Yes, me too.
Absolutely. Trekkie.
Awesome. Now, have you watched, as I said, this is relevant. Have you watched the series Picard?
Oh, yes.
Star Trek Picard. Great. Okay.
Oh, yes.
I'm late to the game. I've only just finished season 1. I mean, it came out like 2 years ago. So I'm a bit late.
So you haven't seen the new season yet?
No, well, I'm halfway through episode 1 and then episode 1 of season 2. And then my husband fell asleep. So we may have to watch that one again. But that's where we're up to. We've only just recently got the streaming service that it's on. So that's why. Now, I do highly recommend it to any Star Trek fans out there. There are some very intriguing things in it. Now, firstly, in the first season, so whenever you watched it, try and remember back. But in episode 3 of season 1, not only do they showcase a hypothetical Romulan form of cartomancy, which from what I've figured out, it isn't based on any real divinatory system. I think it was created for the show, but I need it anyway.
I know, totally. I want it so bad.
But they mention in that episode the Romulan true name being a name that you only share with the one you love, as it has power. Yeah. So from your, I guess, research, is the idea of having a true name something that's replicated in any cultures or traditions here on Earth?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that, you know, and so you probably haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, but there, you know, and I'm not going to remember all the details, right? Because research in and then research out. But there is the idea that the true name is really not so much a name as we understand it, you know, but we'll think of it maybe like a tone or an energetic vibration that would be the amalgamation of like your complete energy field, right? So it's your energetic signature. And then we might give that a verbal name, more like a symbolic container, you know, for that energetic reality. But there's a lot of cultures, you know, in which the true name is highly guarded. You know, I think the most famous is from ancient Egypt, you know, where the goddess Isis is able to basically trick Ra into giving up his true name. And and it's a trick. I mean, she is ambitious. You know, she becomes the most powerful of the Egyptian gods because she's able to get this from him. But Ra is the creator, right? And he was getting old and feeble. And from some of the spittle of his mouth that fell like under the dirt, Isis forms that into clay and forms it into a serpent. And she puts it on his path where she knows that he's going to traverse. And the serpent strikes him. And of course, it has his own divine power. And so he's dying of the venom. And so she knows how to reverse it. But she tells him that she'll do it if he gives her his true name. And he tries to give her some other names instead. And she's like, no, that's not cutting it. You know, I need the true name. And he finally relents and gives her the true name, takes it out of his heart and gives it to her. And I think that that's like so important because it's the heart, the core of our essence. So he gives up the core of his essence to her. And then she saves him and becomes the most powerful of the Egyptian gods. And you find this also in other forms, less dramatic forms, in folklore. I think everybody's probably familiar with the old tale of Rumpelstiltskin. And so that's another one of these naming tales. In fact, there's quite a lot of them. I forget what number it is, but like in the classification of folklore, it has its own number. It's like, the person, you have to guess their name. But it's still that idea that like, oh, if you have somebody's true name, that means that you have power over them. And so we're approaching the true name concept as another type of tag lock, but a very potent one. I would say it's like the tag lock to end all tag locks. I know that in Jewish culture, there is this idea that if someone is thought to be dying, they're on maybe their deathbed, this last ditch effort would be a rabbi would come in and officially change their name, with the idea being that, oh, the angel of death knows you by name. And so, but now they've changed their name, so now they can't find you. Right. So even they're doing magic, and that shows up in a lot of different cultures, too many for me to mention or even remember, quite honestly right now. But it shows up like everywhere, to have somebody's name. In some cultures, you never even say your name out loud. Somebody's, knock on the door. Who's there? It's me. You'd say, you're not going to say your name because somebody might overhear it, or a spirit might overhear it, or you'd have nicknames. Like a family will have a nickname, for you, but they're not ever going to use your deep name. Sometimes only your mother knows, what your deep name is. Even in the craft, we might have different names that we use at different times. Storm Faerywolf is my name that I use every day. It's also a magical name, but I also have other magical names that I use in different traditions. When I've been initiated, I've taken on names as is customary. I also have a name that I only use with the gods that no other humans know. And so, and that kind of that would be closer, I would suppose, to like the idea, of the true name. So yeah, that shows up in a lot of different places. And so I always think, well, we should pay attention to that. If all these different cultures are saying, hey, this is important, maybe we should look at that and treat it as if it's important.
Yeah, I agree. There's often truth in all the myths. There is an underlying grain of truth that comes through with myths, legends, folklore, all of that. It's usually trying to show us something, teach us something, that sort of thing.
Even if it's just in the context of that culture at that time, that's possible, in certain things. But when something shows up in multiple cultures at different times, I think we do need to, at the very least, pay attention to that and sit with it and see, how does this actually play a relevance into my life today?
Yeah. Now, again, with Star Trek, so in episode 7 of that same season, Picard goes onto the Borg cube and meets a former Borg member, which they're all termed XBs, so ex-Borgs. And Hugh, who's one of these XBs, tells Picard that a new name is a new step to a new identity, because they've all changed them from former Borg, they're called XBs, right? So how do you feel about that quote, that a new name is a new step to a new identity?
Yeah, I live it. You already read the introduction, of my book, The Witch's Name. And so that's where I detail how I came, to my name. And I never felt that my birth name was mine. I never felt it was mine. I never really identified with it. It was my father's name, mostly. It was my grandfather's name, mostly. So I kind of felt like it was this handed down thing. It was like getting an old pair of shoes, and I didn't have any say. Not that many people have a say in the name, right, that their parents give them, right. But the fact that it wasn't even unique, in even in my immediate family, I think led to this idea that I was supposed to be just, a carbon copy of the firstborn males, in my family. And I'm certainly not that at all. So I always felt like that wasn't my name, and I was on a search for my name. Now, I never talk about what my legal name was, my birth name rather, because that's my dead name now. And, but I was at least fortunate that it had a lot of nicknames that would commonly go along with it. So I was able, I was raised under one diminutive nickname. So it wasn't exactly what my father was called, but it was close. And then later when I went to college, I got to choose a different type of nickname from it to try to, try on another persona. But it wasn't really until I chose my craft name that I really felt like I was stepping into who I was meant to be, and I do think that it's a tremendous amount of power that most people never even consider, because it's just so ingrained in our culture that, oh, that's your name, that's what your parents gave you, and that's your true name, that's your real name. People will still ask me, what's your real name? Well, Storm Faerywolf is my real name. Is it my legal name? No, although there's elements of that in my legal name. But no, your legal name is not your real name. Your real name is what you identify with. I think it's less important what people call you, and it's more important what you respond to.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And in regards to I am a parent. I have given names to my children. It's very difficult. It's not a fun experience at all. But with my son, I actually used my craft in that, right? Because I had a bit of trouble with it. And I went into meditation whilst pregnant and asked him I didn't know it was a him, actually. I asked them what they wanted their name to be. And so I didn't know the gender of my child or anything. I felt like it was a boy, but I got a name, and his name's Tobias. And so I got that name, and I thought, I like that. It's actually in our family. So like a great uncle has that as their name, and it's a few middle names on my Dutch side. So I thought, that's cool. And then a few weeks later, like I hadn't told anyone except for my husband. I sort of said, this is what I'm thinking, but I'm pretty secretive around what I'm considering to name my child. And because it has power. As soon as you speak it, everyone throws their opinions on it.
Right. Yeah,
it's funny. So I'm like, I'm not going to tell anyone. But I had a friend who is very intuitive, not that she really knows it. And she called me and she said, hey, I had a dream about you last night. I dreamt that you had a boy and you named him Toby, but the full name you said Tobias. And I went, there's my validation. I love it. Doubling up that it wasn't, just me thinking up a random name that was actually coming through.
The universe is like, just in case you weren't paying attention, let's just make sure.
Exactly. And I hadn't said it to anyone. And, it's not a super common name. Like it's not unusual, but it's not super common. So it was great to get that sort of a validation, but there is power in it. So I love that he's named himself, basically.
That's so cool.
It's really cool. So we'll see how, as he grows, he's only one, but we'll see how, as he grows.
He's got some time to grow into it or to grow out of it. But that's a cool name, I will say, because it's not that common, but it's not like so uncommon that it's like foreign and weird and, like people are going to judge it. I think that it's just uncommon enough to where it's like, oh, I'm going to pay attention.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And the fact that it's also in your family, I think that's cool. Also really cool. Being able to draw in some of that ancestral energy.
Yeah, definitely.
If we're again looking at names as opportunities for energies, to be woven into the here and now. That's a beautiful way, I think, to honor the ancestors. But I love that you did the meditation while you were pregnant, that you got to ask your child.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I love it.
I think I got some hints as well with my daughter. So I was convinced I was having a boy because everyone told me I must be having a boy based on, how I looked and my size and all of that.
Oh, right.
They love to comment on a pregnant lady's body, women's bodies in general. But anyway, so I was convinced we're having a boy, and we'd kind of picked out a boy's name. And it was 3 weeks before I gave birth, and I had a dream that we gave birth to a girl, and we couldn't tell anyone that we'd had our baby because we didn't have a name, because I had 0 girls' names picked. Like I was that convinced.
Oh, yeah.
And I woke up and freaked out. I was like, we're going to have a girl. We're having a girl. We have to get a girl's name. And my husband's like, nah, don't worry about it. Like, it's going to be a boy. We're like, no. Change of plans. We need a girl's name. So I went through the top 1,000 names and didn't like any of them. And then I think I went on to Pinterest. Like I just went on this mad hunt for the name, right? And finally we did find one. And again, it's unusual, but not too, well, I don't think it's too unusual. Her name is Aurelia.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, we thought super pretty, but we also wanted all the names to have like a little nickname so they can choose how they want to be seen. So her nickname is Ray. So Aurelia or Ray. So it's almost like a little bit tomboyish as well. it comes from Marcus Aurelius. It's got this very strong and tradition behind it. And so for me, even just naming my children, there was a lot of like looking into it and making sure and all of that. We have a friend as well who's an actor, and we asked him to act out the names in different ways. So he would yell it, he would, say it nicely, say it meanly. He would just do all these little scenarios using the name so we could see how others may use it or perceive it. It was really helpful.
Oh, I like that a lot. That's, God, I wish I had heard that before I wrote the book.
Oh, there you go. If you ever do a reprint, pop it in or something.
There we go. No, that's really awesome because then you get to have kind of a real-time exploration of the different emotions that can be attached to the name. Because I'm thinking too, also like, that stereotypical standard of like, oh, they're in trouble and now I'm going to use their full name, first, middle, last, get your butt in here. All of that is important, as a writer and as a poet. I think that words and of course names, are so important, how they sound. How does it make you feel, when you speak it aloud? I think all of that is so important.
Because there are definitely words, especially in the English language, the words that we use that I'm like, oh, that just the sound of that word, I dislike it. It's something about it. We all have words like that we're just like, oh, don't use that word.
Right. I'm going to cringe everybody out now because the word that I mostly hear from people that they don't like is moist.
Oh yeah, I knew you were going to say moist.
People hate that word. And it's so funny. I don't mind it because honestly, it makes me think of cake. And I'm like, and I love cake. So
depends on your association, I think.
Exactly. But everybody seems to hate it. Right. And so, but it's just the sound of it, and that can be based on a lot of different things. Obviously we have our own baggage, who used that word around you. You heard it in a weird way. It's always going to bring up this particular thing that happened when you were 6 or, whatever, and that's just how we are, so one word, one name, they're not created equal in everyone's ears. It's like one name that can be beautiful to somebody else is going to be like, oh, I can't stand that.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. That's life.
Absolutely.
But it's good to test that out, I think, beforehand. And then I think in the case of like choosing your own name, I think one of the exercises in there involves like looking in the mirror and then speaking that name aloud and saying, I am, so I'd look in the mirror, I am Storm Faerywolf. And then how do you feel when you say that? And maybe at first you feel silly. And again, that's okay. We want to make friends with silly, right? But then when we move through silly, then we start getting somewhere, so then how do you feel? I feel powerful, when I say my name, I feel free, so, and that's how people should feel, or some variant on that. If you never get past the silly, well, then maybe you need to scale it back and try something different.
Yeah. Well, I found the same, even choosing to call myself Hannah, the Suburban Witch, and adding that in there. And I found, like, whilst I didn't do that mirror trick, because I make my YouTube videos, and every single one I would open with, hello, Hannah the Suburban Witch here. And then I'm editing it and I'm rewatching it and I'm checking it. So I saw myself saying Hannah the Suburban Witch, Hannah the Suburban, over and over and over. And it just ingrained that like persona more so into me. And I think there was power in almost just choosing that part of my name for my business and how I present myself out there publicly as well. But even though it's not my legal full name, right? But I get mail that says to Hannah the Suburban Witch. And
right.
There is power in that as well, even though it's not my 24/7 name.
Back several years ago, there was a big thing on Facebook, where they wanted you to use your legal name, only your legal name.
Yes, I remember.
And so they forced me for a while to go by my legal name. And I was obviously complaining because I'm like, well, but I write and teach under this other name. And I'm not trying to hide, from the government or, whatever. But I just don't need that out there. And it I don't know, dilutes the brand, Yeah.
And it hurt the trans community a lot.
I was going to say, for other people, it was issues of safety,
yeah,
and just self-esteem. And they made me jump through hoops, but I was able to do it. We're actually a little wondering about what's going to happen now with Twitter, on that level, because of course, as we know, Elon Musk has now bought Twitter, and he said he wants to authenticate all humans on Twitter. So what does that mean? We don't exactly know yet. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think free speech is going to extend itself to people using pseudonyms, for whatever reason. But we'll see. Fingers crossed. Because again, a legal name is not necessarily your real name. A legal name can just be that albatross around your neck. You haven't been able to get it legally changed. Somebody's real name is not synonymous with their legal name. And nobody's really entitled to your legal name. People think that, they want to know my name. I just posted something a few days ago about on Google. If you Google Storm Faerywolf, Google will give you suggestions, and one based on what other people are searching for. And one of the things that comes up is Storm Faerywolf, real name. So people are trying to figure out my real name. So my thing is, well, you already found it out. Storm Faerywolf is my real name. Did you mean my legal name? Yeah, I'm not sharing that with you, but because it's nobody's business. That's just for telemarketers and bill collectors. Nobody else needs that info. You'll find me just fine without it.
Yeah. It's funny the change in changing names these days. Like when I got married, I changed my last name. And it was not easy. And I can't remember if I had to pay a fee, but it was definitely 1,000,001 hoops to go through with the bank and driver's license and passport and all of those things. It was a bit of a headache, and I would not repeat that again willingly. But then my grandmother, my late grandmother, I remember once I went with her to the doctors and they were calling her Anne. I was like, that's not your name. Why are they calling you Anne? She said, oh, that's what it says on my Medicare card, which is like our health card over here. I said, but that's not why is that on there? That's not your legal name at all. It's a totally different name. She said, oh, well, when we got here, no one could understand my Dutch name. So I just told them it was Anne. And it's on all these things. And my grandfather's the same. Both of them, all of their legal documents are not their legal name, which is like the opposite. It's
right.
But I mean, that was 50 years ago. 60 years ago. I lied.
Well, there's also that thing too. I don't know if this played a role, but obviously she said it was difficult for people to understand her Dutch name. But that happens so often where people wanted to Americanize their names also so they wouldn't stand out, And I just think, obviously, if that's what people want to do, that's for them to decide. And, everyone should have their own agency. I just think that so much is potentially lost, when that drive towards homogenization, comes in. Ease
for other people, not so much
for other people. Exactly. It's like, what other people should have to learn.
Yeah.
I understand why, it's kind of greasing the wheels, let's make things easier, whatnot. But, and it was a different time, then I'd like to hope that less people would do that now, that more people would be able to take pride in their cultural heritage and in their name, unless she didn't like her name. And this could be an opportunity to change it, right? But it should be our decision that we make because it empowers us, because it enables us to live more proudly, to be more centered, in our own life and experience. Anything else is just trying to cater to other people. So many pagan festivals I've gone to where people are like, oh, it doesn't matter what you call me. No, it matters. It absolutely matters, because let me tell you, it matters what you call me.
Now, one thing I want to ask is, especially because your name is Storm. So, and I hope you don't take offense to this, but we have a cat named River. And I've always thought if I got another cat, I would like to name them Storm, because I thought that was really cute, like River and Storm, kind of like that water
it's a good
vibe.
name.
Yeah.
So
And then I kind of thought, well, if I call them Storm, are they just going to be like this wild cat? Like, do you think that the meanings around, like, when I think of a storm, I think of it quite powerful and wild. Do you think when you took that name on, does that change an aspect of you or how you present yourself?
Yes. Easy answer, yes. The longer answer, there's a lot of nuance, to that as well. In my particular vision, because of course, for me, the storm, my name, Storm Faerywolf, is a 3-part name. And each of those 3 parts came from some type of visionary experience. And the storm, I had a dream where there was a tornado and there's lightning and all this stuff. And I was out in this field and the tornado was coming, and I had this magic ring. And the magic ring actually came from dreams I had as a little boy. I used to have this recurring dream where I had this magic dream or the magic ring, and I was always trying to figure out how to make it work. And that was kind of the theme. Like I would have this dream, could never make it work, whatever. And then I'd have the dream again, still couldn't make it work, for years. And I hadn't had the dream in many, many years. And then suddenly here I was again as an adult. And in the dream, the tornado comes and picks me up because I'm not able to get this ring to work ever. And I'm terrified. And I think that's it. I'm going to die, and I'm brought up into the sky. I'm tossed around like a rag doll. And I finally just let go. I was like, okay, that's it. I'm dead. And I just let go. I stopped struggling. And in that moment in the dream, all the wind and the rain and the hail and the lightning all felt like it just like went into me. And then I was just let gently down on the ground. And then I woke up and I felt very buzzy. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, that's Storm. I have that within me. It doesn't rule me. I have that potential. And so my relationship to it is that I try to be in the calm inside the storm. I try to be in that central space, but I do have access, to that power. My rising sign is Aries. And so I kind of feel like it taps in with that as well. There's that fiery kind of maybe lightning, kind of striking power that when I've needed it, I feel like I can call on that. But that's not something I do indiscriminately. Mm-hmm. I want to live just in that calm, that center space. And that is a part of my daily practice, I would say, is trying to remind myself to be inside that calm center, as opposed to being in the chaos, that's all around me. And I think it's a good meditative exercise, because we always have all that chaos swirling around us in the world. We all should try to be in that center so that we are as unswayed, I suppose, by the chaos as we can be, so that we can respond mindfully instead of mindlessly react. But it's also a reminder that that's there, that potential is there. So watch it, Storm. You got to make sure that you're not lashing out. So yeah, I have some anger. I can do that. My Aries rising can flare up.
I'm sure you have no trouble hitting the challenge head on. All right. So lastly, you have another book coming out soon from when we're recording this. By the time it comes out, it will be out in the world, and it's called The Satyr's Kiss. Can you tell us what this one will be about?
Yeah. So this one is specifically focused on queer men. And it is a way of what, in my view, it's an appeal towards the creation of a queer craft that centers the queer male experience in our own practice, and something that also incorporates sex magic into our practice. And this was actually the first book that I ever wanted to write when I was 14 and actually formally dedicated myself, to the craft. Mm-hmm. This is the book I wanted to do because I felt strongly that that sexual energy was so potent and that it was so wrapped up in the history of witchcraft.
Well, it sounds like a book that's definitely needed. I've chatted with Casey Giovinco before on the podcast as well, and we did talk a lot about how there is a need for, I guess, the gay face of the god and how that all entails, and taking away that, I guess, the heteronormative rituals that can be within witchcraft, and finding a space that exists for you as well.
Yeah, that's, because I did, growing up in the craft, I mean, that sounds kind of lofty. I just mean that I had a lot of books, growing up in the 70s, things like, psychicism, ESP, telepathy, and then witchcraft. They were popular, and they're popular again today. And, but there was always that heteronormative thing. If you look at Wicca, it is a very heteronormative practice, and I'm not getting down on it because at least 90%, of the world will say is like heterosexual, or, we are a minority. And, but we were always expected to fit into, we're basically asked to be like a square peg in a round hole, and we were always told, oh, you just have to, play the part, okay, so you're a man, so your working partner must be a woman. There was a lot of that. Oh, the initiations must be cross-gender, right? I'm wondering how that's going to happen today with more of a realization that gender is not binary.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean, cross-gender? Luckily in fairy tradition, that's not a thing. Gender never plays a role in anything that we do, in fairy. And so I feel like I found the right place. And so this book definitely has practices. There are exercises for sex magic for individuals, for couples, but also for groups. I'm also out there trying to promote the idea that, hey, polyamorous relationships are real and they're just as valid. I'm in a polyamorous relationship. I have 3 partners, and we call ourselves House Forlocks, as a collective.
I love that.
And thank you. Yeah, I think that was Matt Oren, came up with that. It all started on our iPhones, our little, when we text each other, our collective name, and it just stuck. But yeah, there wasn't really stuff out there. And so I wanted to put out at least the idea, here's how we could create a queer craft. But it doesn't insist on sexual practice. It gives the option for, and then in most of the cases, I will give like a non-sexual version, of this exercise or this ritual. I call the sex rites I call them red rites, and then the non-sexual ones I call blue, and that comes out of some lore and fairy tradition. But I try to give different versions because not everybody is going to want to incorporate sexuality into their craft, and that also shouldn't be the be-all end-all of what it means to be queer. Although it is the thing that is often used to attack and shame us. And so I do think it's important to embrace our sexuality and to move into a space of pride, with our sexuality, because it has been the thing that gets used against us. We're often told, oh, it's unnatural, which is the weirdest accusation ever, because it's like, basically, thousands of animals have been documented to have homosexual behavior. Ancient cultures seemed to have little to no problem, with it. It's really Christianity and the monotheistic religions that have made it more of a problem. And even in their histories, it wasn't always a problem. There's plenty of indications of same-sex marriages that were performed by the early Catholic Church, for example. So I have different feast days and remembrance days as a way that we as modern queer people can remember our queer ancestors, what I like to call the rainbow dead, and make them a part of our craft. And I'm not saying that we have to abandon the other forms of witchcraft. I'm not saying, oh, queer people, now you can't do Gardnerian, or now you can't do this. No, what I'm saying is, here's an alternative. We can start where we are. We don't have to fit into somebody else's paradigm. We have our own, we have our own mysteries, and we should be able to explore them. And so this book is really just an attempt at starting that work. And I'm hoping that other people will pick up on it and take it further than I ever could. And so I'd like to think that this is my humble contribution to that tapestry, is hoping that we can then look at queer sex as something that can be holy, as opposed to something that is just, done in secret, or polite society doesn't want to talk about it. I think these are things we do need to talk about, and I'd like to think the society is moving in the right direction. Some days are better than others, but this is how we get there, by speaking our truth.
This is how it starts, right? A book like this, 30, 40 years ago would have just been not possible, right? Whereas now it is possible. And so that indicates, A, we've seen a lot of change and growth so far. But B, this opens the gate for more people to be inspired and to feel seen. And I think I'm pretty critical of books in terms of making sure that they are inclusive and that they are showcasing things in the way that it should be, represented without that the heteronormative ideals or the womb-centered magic, like that very turfy side of things that witchcraft can sometimes go into. And so I'm really happy to hear that you've got this book coming out, and that it's sort of trying to include the people that are often not represented, because I think that's necessary. So thank you.
I'm hoping that I was adequate, in doing so. And I guess I will learn that in a couple of weeks.
So if people do want to find you online, obviously Twitter's the best place, but what's your website and what's your Twitter handle?
Yeah. So on Twitter, I'm Storm Faerywolf. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm Faerywolf. But you can find me in all of those things from my website, faerywolf.com. That's FAERYWOLF.com. And then you could also find me at modernwitchuniversity.com. That's our online school where we have our downloadable classes, including our Black Rose Witchcraft course. And then you can also find me. I'm a columnist for The Wild Hunt. So go to wildhunt.org and you can find my writings there too.
Awesome. I will put all of those links in the show notes for this episode as well. Now, if you are listening, make sure to also follow us on the podcast specific Instagram page, which is Witch Talks Podcast. And if you leave a review to Apple Podcasts and send me a screenshot via DM or email to suburbanwitchery@gmail.com, you will receive a free chakra checkup from yours truly, just to incentivize you, as reviews help a lot. If you do love the podcast, please also share with a friend or on social media. That would be amazing. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And as always, I hope you all have a lovely day wherever you are in the world today. Thank you very much, Storm, for joining us today. And thank you everyone else for listening.